sir.
SEC opponent in the Rebels, Ole Miss also got to practice today as they took to the floor at 11:30 this morning. We'll hear from the Coyotes tonight on KELO News at 5:30 and 10. Reporting live from Waco, Texas, Grant Sweeter, KELO Sports.
Thank you, Grant. The South Dakota State men took to the court in the NCAA tournament today.
We'll bring you a live report and highlights of their matchup against Providence just ahead.
And we had some temperatures that were nice and warm for this time of year. We're at highs today in the mid to upper 50s despite a north breeze and the case of Sioux Falls thicker cloud cover. We're going to warm things up this weekend, though. We'll talk about that and show you our next chance of rain next.
Follow your favorite high school team through the tournament. Visit our high school basketball.
People who were queuing at a bread queue yesterday. They were lining up to try and buy bread. In both cases, it's understood they were hit with artillery, and it's the use of artillery against civilians which has now really begun to characterize operations exceptionally almost here in Kiev. There was a civilian death today, but it was a result of a cruise missile being shot down here by the Ukrainians, a caliber cruise missile, clearly intending precision weapon for a change, heading for a different target, because one of the issues here, Wolf, has been the increasing use by the Russians of dumb bombs and of area weapons like multiple rocket launching systems. So when they do use a precise weapon, such as they used in Mariupol, you know that they've really meant to hit that target. Elsewhere, it's just profligate disregard for civilian life, Wolf.
Certainly is. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, as you know, is pretty powerful, made an explicit reference to the Holocaust today when he addressed the German parliament. Tell our viewers what he said.
Well, President Zelenskyy has gone around the world pressing the right red buttons. Churchill in the United Kingdom, Martin Luther King and others in the United States. But in Germany, he chose, because very frustrated he is by the German response to the plight of Ukraine, both economically and militarily, frustrated over the lack of supply of weapons to support his effort here in Ukraine. And so, almost inevitably, though, he invoked not only the Iron Curtain, but the Holocaust.
Every year, politicians say never again. Now, I see that these words are worthless. In Europe, a people is being destroyed.
Now, that very explicit reference there, designed to make the Germans feel very uncomfortable. It's the Germans who have, over the last year and a half, for example, supplied more weaponry to the authoritarian regime in Egypt than they have to the democracy here in Ukraine. Now, they have their own reasons for that, not least constitutional, but he is anxious to see some weapons coming his way from the Germans and everybody else, Wolf.
Sam, that President Zelenskyy, he went out in Kyiv, and we're showing our viewers some video, and he met with some of the victims of these brutal Russian attacks against civilians in the Ukrainian capital. That was a dramatic moment, wasn't it?
Very dramatic. He is being very skilled indeed about going out, meeting people, but constantly broadcasting over social media to his population. A couple of days ago he went out and met wounded soldiers. Now he's been out meeting civilians. He's very much out on the ground, Wolf.
He certainly is, to his credit. He's a courageous leader indeed. Sam Kiley in Kyiv for us. Thank you. Stay safe over there, as I tell you every day. Let's get some more now on all of this. Joining us, the Principal Deputy National Security Advisor in the Biden administration, Jonathan Feiner. John, thanks very much for joining us. Let me, first of all, get your thoughts on this. As you know, the U.S. and other Western countries assess that thousands of Russian troops have been killed since the war began about a month ago, with a range from as low as 3,000 to as high as maybe 10,000. Where on that range does the U.S. best estimate fall? Can Russia sustain this war with such high losses?
Thanks, Wolf. So we don't have a precise number of Russian casualties to give you, but what I can say is that I think that the casualty number is probably much beyond what Russia expected, particularly just in the early days of this conflict. And look, we're taking a two-part approach to this. The first part is providing the Ukrainians the tools that we think they need on the battlefield to be most effective against the Russian army. That's predominantly anti-aircraft and anti-armor weapons. The president laid out in some detail yesterday exactly what we are putting in to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian defense forces. And then second, pressing the Russians, pressing them diplomatically, and most importantly, pressing them with our sanctions, which have taken an enormous bite out of the Russian economy in just a few weeks.
Certainly has. We've also now heard from the Secretary of State and the President. They both accuse Russia of war crimes publicly. Practically, though, how does that change the U.S. response? Because Putin won't be tried in The Hague anytime soon, right?
Look, I think we'll leave those questions to another time, but the most important thing about what they said is that these are not just rhetorical statements. These are descriptions of what we are seeing on our televisions, what Ukrainians are seeing up close with their own eyes, what your correspondents are reporting about day in, day out. Deliberately targeting civilians in a conflict is a war crime, and that's why the President and the Secretary of State have said what they've said.
So does that mean there's not going to be any more summits between Putin and Biden? The President calling Putin a murderous, a dictator, a pure thug, a war criminal. I take it meetings are now off the table. The President's not going to meet with somebody he brands as a criminal.
Well, if we have ways to convey messages to the Russians when we need to. Jake Sullivan spoke with his Russian counterpart just the other day to convey some pretty strong messages on behalf of the President and our administration. I have nothing to report to you at this time about any upcoming conversations between the President and President Putin.
Secretary Blinken, as you know, is warning Putin that he says Putin is growing more and more desperate. Does that raise, John, the risk of a chemical weapons attack by the Russians, or, God forbid, the use of nuclear weapons?
Wolf, I'm not going to characterize President Putin's mindset. Far be it for me to try to do that. I'll leave that to others. But we have been quite clear about the fact that we are concerned about the potential for Russian use of chemical or biological weapons. And partly that concern is fueled by exactly the fact that the Russians themselves are coming out and warning with a high degree of irony in our view that the Ukrainians might be on the verge of using these weapons. First of all, we know that the Ukrainians do not possess those weapons. Second, we know that the Russians have a long history of saying what they are concerned about when it is actually a predictor of what they are about to do. So we are very concerned about this possibility and are working with the Ukrainians to make sure they have what they need to be able to mitigate and defend, and providing any information that we've got.
What about tactical nuclear weapons?
Look, Wolf, that would obviously be an extraordinary escalation beyond anything that we have seen in recent history. We have no immediate indication that that is something that the Russians are looking at doing, but all escalation in this conflict is something that we oppose. We think that Russia should be taking the opposite approach, de-escalating inside Ukraine, particularly given how this conflict is playing out for them, and seeking diplomacy to try to de-escalate this. That does not seem to be the path they're on, and so, again, we are sticking with our strategy of making sure that we are strengthening the Ukrainians' hands on the battlefield and pressing the Russians by this extraordinary pressure we've been able to place on their economy.
President Biden will attend the extraordinary meeting of all the NATO leaders in Brussels next week. Can we expect these leaders to announce new specific support for Ukraine?
The President is very much looking forward to being out in Europe. As you and others have rightly pointed out, there is a high degree of unity and alignment among the Western allies, NATO allies in this case. And the President is looking forward to seeing his counterparts face to face. I suspect they will have a number of new measures that they will be able to disclose and roll out during those conversations, but I'm not going to get ahead of them a few days in advance.
John Feiner at the White House for us, the Principal Deputy National Security Advisor to the President. Thanks as usual for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Just ahead, is Ukraine close to getting a critical air defense system that they desperately are seeking? I'll ask the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I'll ask him what he's learning. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.
I don't just NCAA tournament game. We've got the latest for you coming up on Dakota News Now at 6.
Promotional consideration provided by...
For joint care, you...
They get hard and crunchy.
Not because I have a crystal ball, but because there is a certain pattern. There's a way that these people act when they are backed into a corner, and then they act in predictable ways, actually.
Understood. And a really important context here as we look at all of this. Ruth Ben-Ghiat and Richard Haas, my thanks to both of you. Now we go right to the ground in Lviv, where Cal Perry from NBC News has been reporting. Cal?
Hey, Ari, we talked yesterday about civilians being targeted as they left these cities. It seems like since we had that discussion and in the past 24 hours, what we're seeing is the Russians now targeting sort of the humanitarian structures of these cities. Yesterday in Cherniv, we had this bloody incident, at least 10 people killed in a bread line. And today in the city of Kharkiv, a market was targeted. We think it was targeted by Grad rockets. Again, this is where people are going to get food. We are seeing this now happen, play out across cities in the eastern part of the country. Again, in the city of Mariupol, Russian soldiers staying where they have been in a central hospital there. It is something that is really changing sort of the urban combat in that city because it is bogging down an entire half of the city. We've spoken a lot about that shelter in which there was 1,000 civilians sheltered, those rockets seemingly hitting the top of that building. And it is, again, the places where people are going to get food. The World Food Program here says at least 5 million people are in immediate need of food assistance, and that does not account for the folks who are still sheltered in these bomb shelters. We know last week 1 girl died of dehydration. You can expect to see more and more of these reports again as we see the Russians targeting not just bread lines, but these marketplaces as well, the places that are sustaining what remains of these civilians who are desperately trapped in these cities, Ari.
Cal Perry with that report. Thank you and stay safe. Coming up tonight, we have a panel with 2 decorated American generals on the military strategy and how Ukraine has proven so resilient. Really interesting breakdown. And today there are some Republican lawmakers who voted against punishing Putin for this invasion. We have a former CIA officer who's serving in Congress discussing that and the road ahead. And a special report, we're going to look into what Republicans have said and gotten wrong about this war, and Arnold Schwarzenegger speaking out using his fame in Russia to push what he calls the truth. Stay with us.
Migraine attacks? Qulipta can help.
More time with our families, more time with our dreams.
And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and Blinken and President Biden and others have not, since the inception.
Guided, yes. But I believe many of them are my friends. They have good hearts. But you gotta stop the policies that
are and debating what we should actually be doing. Whether sending jets to Ukrainian,
even traditionally Republican, that we could embrace. I mean, curing diabetes is one of them. Is that Republican or?
We have not all sat together and given that a deliberate debate, or whether we.
Because there is a path. There is a path where we can make our future better, but you gotta stop the bloodletting.
We owe Congress more. We owe the American people more, and we owe.
Brought to you by Flex Seal Family.
Cornyn says the reason gas prices are up is because supply here at home is down. He and Republican Senator Pat Toomey say the president needs to focus on helping U.S. oil companies ramp up production.
I'd suggest if we want to help commuters and families suffering from inflation, we can start by reversing the administration's actions, which keep us from using much of our own fossil energy.
There is certainly urgency. There is certainly a need to do everything we can to ensure we're mitigating the impact.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the administration is weighing a range of options to address the rising gas prices. And everything, including suspending the federal gas tax, is still on the table. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
Here in KELO, a fuel distributor in Harding County says that he sold more fuel storage tanks in the last 3 weeks than he does in an entire year. Devin McGrath also says the Olson fuel trucks delivered gas and diesel for 17 hours a day after fuel prices soared. Now the delivery hours are now down to about 12 hours a day. Fuel pumps are miles between residents and they rely on gas for daily operations. Digital reporter Ray Yost explores that area's dependence on fuel with the reality of long-distance driving.
China rose from $50 to $515. One industry trade association sees more storm clouds on the horizon, saying government travel rules are of, quote, great concern, adding, we do not want to see a return to the peak of the crew change crisis that will have a negative impact on global trade. Tech and auto are especially seeing the crunch. Apple supplier Foxconn and automakers like Volkswagen have already paused operations. If this shutdown extends or spreads, the future port clog could be severe, and there are already warning signs. 34 vessels are holding off the coast of Shenzhen compared to just 7 a year ago.
There have been signs that it is becoming more congested because it is getting harder for truckers in particular to go, for instance, between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. So that's a very common passageway between a lot of these goods. And that's because of all these COVID containment measures.
These shutdowns and delays echo what we saw last year, leading to chaos in our supply chain and the highest inflation in 40 years. While we may not see an immediate impact from these new COVID measures, a similar ripple effect may occur, which could erase any progress made in our supply chain crunch. Back to you, Brett.
Kelly O'Grady in the Port of Los Angeles. Kelly, thanks. Up next, why Vladimir Putin is talking of cleansing Russian society. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in San Diego as the Sheriff's Department cracks
ability to use its influence with President Putin and to defend the international rules and principles that it professes to support. Instead, it appears that China is moving in the opposite direction by refusing to condemn this aggression while seeking to portray itself as a neutral arbiter.
So President Biden has met or spoken to Putin and Xi several times, and yet Putin waged the war in Ukraine, threatened to use nukes, and all with China's tacit support for Russia. So, are we in this situation now in spite of these meetings or because of them? NewsNation senior contributor George Will joins us now. George, why does it seem our adversaries have no fear right now? Does it reflect the Biden foreign policy in your view?
I think our adversaries are more cautious than they would be if they didn't have some fear of the United States. I think what Mr. Biden will try to tell President Xi is a general point and a particular point. The general point is that the United States has enough mental bandwidth within its government to pay attention and have other resources to deal with Asia and Europe at the same time. The particular point would be this. It's very important that President Xi not infer from the fact that the United States is not directly giving military support to Ukraine, that it would therefore not directly give military support to Taiwan. Two very different problems with two very different histories and very different U.S. commitments.
Well, President Biden, he's repeatedly said when it comes to Ukraine that more American military involvement means World War III. But let me ask you this. Does staying out of the fight make that possibility of a wider conflict more likely?
I think we're not quite out of the fight. We're certainly not in it directly.
Yeah.
We're in the fight in a proxy way through third parties. But the amount of aid that is poured into Ukraine and the kind of aid, the Javelin tanks that are making mincemeat of some of the Russian armor. There are Russian generals' heads are going to roll back when they get around to evaluating the miserable performance of their army. The very fact that China is asked to come to the aid of Russia against a neighbor of 44 million people and no great military tradition is an astonishing, diminishing event for Russia.
Yeah. You mentioned the proxy war and the missiles. We're sending missiles, we're sending armor, we're sending drones, we're sharing intel with the Ukrainians. Isn't the U.S. already knee-deep in this fight? Where's the line between too much and not enough help?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. There is a line. We don't know where it is, and therefore caution is warranted. But the line clearly, I think, would have been crossed if we had had a no-fly zone. We've been very clear about that. So
George,
it's something that doesn't have...
Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
The line is something that prevents direct U.S. munitions or even direct munitions fired by Americans at Russian men or munitions.
George, you probably remember this quote. It was in Bob Gates' memoir. He's the former defense secretary. He's also the CIA director, but defense secretary during the time Joe Biden was vice president. And he said of Biden, quote, "He's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Now, Joe Biden is president. Let me ask you, in your view, is he effectively leading the West's response?"
I think he is. I think Gates was right, but I think on Ukraine that the Biden-Blinken team has been right. I think they've intervened deftly. I think they have restored America's power in the sense that the rule of power is use it or lose it. And the United States is using its power to orchestrate an astonishingly united West in an astonishing flow of munitions of the sort that are lethal. Remember, we're not making this silly distinction between defensive and offensive military support. We're giving them offensive weapons to come to their defense.
Now, I just want to bring it back to China finally and very quickly. What is the Chinese game here? They have a lot at stake here. Markets in Europe, markets in the United States. They seem to be playing both sides, publicly appearing with Putin and saying the right things, but certainly they wouldn't want to put their economy at risk by openly siding with Putin and giving him what he wants.
I would be very surprised if President Xi hasn't been sobered and made cautious by the ferocity of the economic sanctions that have been brought against Russia. It's much easier to sanction China because China has tentacles and connections all over the world. They would be much more vulnerable as an importing and exporting nation in a way that Russia isn't to sanctions.
Okay, thank you very much, George. Senior News Nation contributor George Will, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Brittany Griner, American basketball star jailed in Russia. Is Putin using her as a political hostage? Details of how much longer they're extending her time behind bars. And it's not just gas prices that are on the rise. How much more you'll be paying to borrow money, and the startling prediction on how high inflation will soar.
I lost 26 pounds and I feel incredible.
Move to SoFi.
Your taxes off to me. You do your thing. We've got your
mother.
2 of those charges were felonies. However, as part of a plea bargain, Slack pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor charges in the incident. He'll be sentenced on March 30th. Also new tonight, an Iowa senator has asked the Justice Department to investigate conditions at a New Jersey nursing home. One of the owners of Woodlawn Behavioral Health is the former vice president at the now-defunct Skyline Healthcare, Louis Schwartz. Schwartz's father, Joseph, is facing both federal and various state charges for tax evasion and Medicaid fraud.
Now let's get one last check of our weather with Chief Meteorologist Jay Trobeck.
All right, we have nice warm temperatures across the KELO region right now. Our temperatures are in the 50s. Should be a pretty nice evening for you. So get out and enjoy. Just a gentle northerly breeze is what we have right now. We're looking for temperatures to be kind of in the same neighborhood, maybe a little bit cooler during the day tomorrow. So something for us to look forward to. During the day today, our high temperatures were actually early today. Right now, we're still in the low to mid 50s as we head for highs a bit earlier. Right now, we're seeing things starting to cool down with the evening sunset. In Sioux Falls right now, currently 53 degrees. Up in the Watertown area, with a few high clouds, 50 degrees there. For the Pier area, we're looking at a few high clouds, what we have right now. Temperature is in the mid 50s there, 57 degrees. And in the case of Rapid City, we're also seeing a fairly mild time. We have a temperature right now 50 degrees. It looks like a little verga coming down from those clouds.
Which kept me from doing what I love. Expert. Get up to 50.
About 20,000 refugees a day are endlessly moving through this one small Polish city on the border with Ukraine, filling the halls of this train station built in the 19th century. While parents figure out train rides to destinations across Europe, exhausted children find baskets of treats and toys. This is what it's like to figure out your next steps when your world has been unraveled by war. Confusion fills the air.
Куда ехать? А куда вы, кстати, собираетесь ехать? Ищите.
У нас в 22:00 есть классный поезд в Прагу, если вы не хотите оставаться в Польше.
These refugees have made it out of the first maze onto a bus that will take them to Warsaw. And there, the questions will start all over again.
And Wolf, as tens of thousands of Ukrainians continue to leave the country, the State Border Guard Service in Ukraine announced today that they have accounted for 320,000 Ukrainians that have actually returned back to the country to help in the fight against Russia. Wolf?
All right, very important. Adela Vandera on the Polish border with Ukraine. Thank you.
Broken clouds to the north and the west. Our temperatures are going to be quite mild. Our lows will be in the 20s. Then tomorrow, partly cloudy skies in the morning, mostly sunny.
Potentially hundreds of civilians feared trapped in the basement of that bombed theater in Mariupol. Ukraine's resistance fighting back against Russian forces. Video provided by the Ukrainian National Guard showing a Russian tank coming under fire.
Live from KELO Media Group, KELO News at 6.
We have an update on a 40-year-old cold case. Today, the mother of baby Andrew met with the parole board.
South Dakota State fell out of the NCAA tournament at the hands of Providence. We're going to have a live report from New York coming up.
Who called Putin a war criminal. Blinken now saying he believes Russia is committing war crimes. Our Ian panel in Kyiv with the babies born to surrogate mothers, families waiting all over the world, including the U.S. Ian standing by from the Capitol again tonight. Also tonight, the urgent warning from Secretary Blinken about Russia potentially unleashing a chemical attack. What he said today, and our Martha Raddatz in Ukraine tonight. She has new reporting here. How concerned are American authorities about this? Also tonight, Putin's state of mind. And how safe is Ukraine's President Zelenskyy? What Martha has learned. President Biden, meanwhile, at the White House tomorrow, this crucial call with China's President Xi. How concerned is the administration that China may help Russia with military equipment or otherwise? Mary Bruce live at the White House. Here at home tonight, the pandemic and U.S. authorities urging not alarm but caution amid these rising COVID cases across Europe and China, led by the Omicron subvariant, predicting it could become the dominant strain here. What they're now saying about masks in this country and how transmissible this Omicron subvariant is. We have just learned tonight what led to that deadly head-on collision, killing 9 people in Texas, including college athletes and their coach. The driver of the pickup truck that crossed into that lane was a 13-year-old. Also tonight, the deadly pileup on an interstate, up to 50 cars, several people killed, vehicles on fire, authorities pointing to fog tonight. We are tracking severe storms from Texas all the way to the east tomorrow. Ginger Z is standing by to time this out. And St. Patrick's Day cheer has returned. And what happened after our report here last night, that grandmother with her message in Ukrainian. We love our viewers.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a very busy Thursday night. And we begin tonight with the war in Ukraine and the desperate rescue effort now unfolding, searching for survivors, possibly hundreds of Ukrainians, men, women, and children who could be trapped in a basement under the rubble after that theater was bombed in Mariupol. Bombed, as we told you last night here, even with the word children written in Russian on the ground on both sides of the building. It was hit anyway. The remains of the theater still smoldering. Ukrainian authorities say it is impossible to know for sure, but they say up to 1,000 people had been using that theater as a shelter. Unclear how many were inside it when it was hit. And in the capital of Kyiv, the images tonight, firefighters battling flames, evacuating dozens of residents from an apartment building struck by parts of a broken missile falling from the sky. And tonight, Ukraine's National Guard releasing video showing a Russian tank coming under fire in Mariupol. A soldier was seen running from the tank. Tonight, Ukraine saying counterattacks are succeeding against Russian troops. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy today visiting wounded civilians in a hospital in the capital. And tonight, the U.S. now confirming an American citizen was killed in Chernihiv amid a reported artillery attack on civilians. And with Vladimir Putin isolated in Russia, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken tonight saying he personally agrees with President Biden, who called Putin a war criminal. Blinken saying he believes Russia is committing war crimes. And what Secretary Blinken warned today about Russia potentially unleashing a chemical attack now. Martha Raddatz with new reporting tonight on that, on Putin's state of mind, and on concerns over President Zelensky's safety. But we begin tonight with ABC senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell leading us off from Kyiv again tonight.
Tonight, the desperate hunt for survivors of that horrific attack on a theatre believed to be sheltering as many as 1,000 people in Mariupol. The wreckage of the building left smouldering, as seen in these verified videos on social media, as a frantic rescue effort got underway today. Ukrainian authorities say so far only 130 people have been confirmed rescued from the site. Hundreds are still missing. Some may have escaped. Others are believed to be alive in the basement, trapped under the rubble. President Zelensky's office saying for now they have no clear figures for how many people are still inside. In one of the few remaining hospitals there, the injured are rushed into ER under relentless Russian attacks. Doctors frantically trying to save people's lives, even as they and the hospitals they work in repeatedly come under fire. Videos posted to social media show other sites also sheltering civilians being hit, like this swimming pool complex. Some have escaped the besieged city, but as many as 250,000 may still be trapped there as the fighting rages. Aerial footage released by the Azov Battalion, a far-right paramilitary group now part of the Ukrainian National Guard, shows a Russian tank with a Z turning onto a Mariupol street. The tank comes under fire several times before a soldier escapes, trying to take cover. Minutes later, other soldiers appear to be killed. Hundreds, possibly thousands of civilians have been killed in this war. Today, a family of 5 was killed in Chernihiv in what Ukrainian authorities say was a Russian strike. The emergency services sharing a graphic video showing rescue workers recovering the bodies of 3 children, a 12-year-old girl and 3-year-old twins, and their parents. The governor of the northern city describing colossal losses and destruction. Tonight, the State Department confirming that an American citizen was killed in a Russian artillery strike there. Ukrainian officials identifying him as 68-year-old James Whitney Hill. And in Kyiv, every day this week has started like this. The residents woken to early morning explosions. Firefighters rushing to extinguish flames from the residential block reportedly hit when a Russian rocket was intercepted. And every day, shell-shock survivors are having to be rescued from what remains of their homes. President Zelenskyy visited some of the wounded today. The Vlasenko family were hit by shelling as they tried to escape in their car from a town near Kyiv. 16-year-old Katya covering her 8-year-old brother Igor with her own body and being badly wounded. Her mother, Tatiana, also suffering shrapnel wounds. They both need months of medical care. Today, US Secretary Blinken said he personally agreed with President Biden that the Russians are committing war crimes and said the US would be investigating and had this warning.
We have a strong sense of what Russia could do next. We believe that Moscow may be setting the stage to use a chemical weapon and then falsely blame Ukraine to justify escalating its attacks on the Ukrainian people.
Today, Ukraine's lead negotiator in talks with Russia said a compromise on a future peace agreement could be reached within a couple of days or a couple of weeks, with a possible summit between Zelenskyy and Putin. But 3 weeks since it began, this punishing war grinds on and touches even the very youngest and most vulnerable. In a dank, airless basement without windows, 20 babies born to surrogate mothers are hiding from the war, cared for by 8 dedicated nurses.
You already have a very hard job. How much more difficult and dangerous is it because of the war?
Ludmila says the hardest part is the small enclosed space and the constant threat of explosions. But the babies still need to be fed, taken care of and loved. Parents from America, Europe and elsewhere are awaiting their children, but Russia's invasion has kept them away. Only a handful have braved the war to come to Kyiv and get their new children.
Well, just incredible scenes down in this basement. You can see these women caring for the babies 24 hours a day, barely getting any sleep. And if you want to know what Russia's invasion of Ukraine has done, Nothing represents it more than these babies hiding underground from bombs.
Bless those women taking care of the babies in the capital of Kyiv. Ian Panel back with us tonight. And Ian, I know U.S. authorities say that the Russians have been stalled in multiple locations across Ukraine. In fact, the Pentagon saying tonight that the Russians are still about 9 miles out from where you are in Kyiv, where they've been for days. You've been reporting that. What are you seeing on the ground? And we're also learning tonight about more of this military equipment being sent by the U.S., these small kamikaze drones, as some call them, that can be quite effective.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, interestingly, the UK Ministry of Defence saying today that they think the Russian invasion stalled on all fronts. And we have heard these intense battles being fought around Kyiv. But as you say, the Russian advance has effectively been stuck about 9 miles away. So that's why the Kremlin seems to be switching to these longer range strikes, which of course the Ukrainians need help with. And so, yes, this US military aid package now includes these 100 Switchblade or kamikaze drones, which can target Russian vehicles. And they don't drop a payload like typical drones. They fly directly into their targets and destroy them. David?
Ian Panel leading us off tonight. Ian, thank you. And you heard Ian report there on U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's warning about Russia potentially using a chemical attack. You also heard Russian forces being held back, at least for now. So let's bring in our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz. She's live in Lviv, Ukraine. And Martha, I know you have new reporting tonight on a couple of fronts. First, we know these Russian troops are being held back. So Russia, as you've learned, is now turning to long-range missiles in many cases to try to reach these Ukrainian cities. And I'm curious, what are your sources telling you about this growing concern over possible chemical attacks as well?
Well, David, the Russians are relying on the longer range systems, moving them to the border and firing into Ukraine from Russia because they are afraid they will be intercepted or taken by the Ukrainians if they move them inside Ukraine. And the concern about chemical weapons is enormous. They feel Putin will use them, and we've learned it would likely be in the south of Ukraine, and then, of course, blame Ukraine, David.
And Martha, I was just fascinated by the note you sent in. Your sources also weighing in on Putin's isolation, his state of mind, and late today you sent word that there's a growing concern over the safety of Ukraine's President Zelenskyy.
Exactly, David. Putin remains isolated, they say, prone to anger and worried about his military capabilities, and he is making a direct appeal to China for help, and they believe Zelenskyy is still in great danger. He's very well protected right now. He is moving around a lot, but that danger truly remains, David.
Martha Raddatz on the ground in Ukraine for us as well tonight. Martha, thank you. Meantime, President Biden...
Do those conservative efforts to minimize Vladimir Putin look right or wrong against the facts of this war?
Those comments are extraordinarily disgraceful, and they were frankly disgraceful at the time because any person who was in elected office or close to elected office had a very clear understanding of Vladimir Putin's aggressive means by which he wanted to take and maintain power within his own country, his incursion into Crimea, his efforts to influence and impact the United States' election. I mean, issue after issue after issue, we have known that this is who Vladimir Putin is, and it should not have taken the murder of mothers and babies in a maternity ward or the shelling of a theater where civilians were taking cover for anyone to understand how dangerous this man is.
Given your strong mastery of the foreign policy issues as well as serving in the Congress, do you see a shift here, and what are you accounted for? As I did also mention, when it comes to the recent votes, the vast majority of the Republican Party has been joining Biden and your party's efforts to go at Putin, to sanction him, to do everything but put boots on the ground, which is very different from some of what we just heard and certainly under the last president.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is that for years there was an effort to not only appease Putin, but appease Trump. And certainly time and time again, former President Trump excused Vladimir Putin's behavior. He defended him. I think the Helsinki press conference was an unforgettable, particularly those of us with the national security background, an unforgettable vision to see the President of the United States take the side of the leader of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, over his own intelligence services. That was an extraordinary day. And then fast forward, when there were reports and intel reporting that Vladimir Putin was putting bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan payable to the Taliban, and we saw defense after defense after defense. I mean, time and time again, the former president defended Putin. He's continued to do so. And so, unfortunately, when he was the president, far too many people fell in line with his defense of Vladimir Putin, and it's inexcusable. I am grateful that now people are finally starting to speak up, to recognize that this man is a danger, that he is a war criminal, that he has killed civilians. But frankly, he's done exactly what he said he would do. And so it is good that more people are standing up and recognizing that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, that we have to put the most crushing of sanctions against Russia that we can, that we cannot treat Russia like a normal country because it is not functioning like a normal country, that we have to continue to provide incredible quantities of aid to the Ukrainians as they've been fighting for their freedom. But let's remember that it was also the former president who tried to withhold military aid. The threat of Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine is nothing new. It is why for years we have provided them with military aid so that they would be able to have the posture to demonstrate their own strength and to keep Russia defensively from invading and to be able to react if need be. And we think back to just a couple years ago when the president attempted to leverage that aid on a call with President Zelenskyy for a political favor. This is the reason that former President Trump was impeached the first time. And I think at the time there was such of a discussion of, well, what does this military aid mean? Now we know, right? Now it's clear to every person why this military aid was and continues to be so important.
Well, that goes, and Congresswoman, you make several important points, including your emphasis on the reality of the foreign policy stakes. And while people are busy living their lives, and we know America's been through a lot lately, the type of misinformation or outright lying about what you just referred to was swallowed by people. They heard that maybe it wasn't such a big deal, maybe Putin's not so bad, who cares about Ukraine, quote unquote, and at that moment in time it was more believable. So some of those voices I showed might have known better, but lied to a lot of Americans about that who accepted that. My final question to you is about political realignment. We hear about that in so many contexts. If you look in the modern era, of course, foreign policy has been a big part of domestic politics. We had a Cold War we all know about, and we had the post-Cold War period, we had the 9/11 period, then we had the Democratic Party's evolution from a basically pro-Iraq war to anti, which is what Obama rode in through. We had all of the domestic partisan debates over Russia, even if maybe they shouldn't have been partisan, in the Trump era, some of which you just walked us through and which looks even worse today. Now we have this new fissure. Do you see this as a long-term realignment for the Republican Party? Do you see that being something that's constructive? Or do you think this is just under the heat of the current war, and in a year we might hear more about how, as Rudy Giuliani was saying, Putin was just so much more decisive than American presidents?
I'll defer to my Republican colleagues to kind of create the path forward for themselves and for their party. But I think that now is the time for choosing. We are seeing an assault on a democratic state in Europe by an oppressive authoritarian regime that is trying not just to invade Ukraine, but to defeat the democratic ideals that the Ukrainians are fighting for and dying for. And we, as the oldest democracy in the world and a beacon of hope that other nations have long aspired to emulate, have a responsibility to not just defend democracies like Ukraine, to not just provide them what they need, including, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of different javelins and stingers and ammunition and grenade launchers, et cetera, but to defend the ideals that Ukrainians are dying for. And so I hope that they'll choose correctly and invest in not only supporting our Ukrainian allies, but supporting our own democracy at home.
Yeah. Congresswoman Spanberger, thank you for this conversation. We wanted to lay those facts out. When we come back, Arnold Schwarzenegger is very popular in Russia. Now he's using that popularity for public diplomacy, straight to the Russian people against Putin.
Ben isn't worried about retirement. His personalized plan is backed by the team at Fidelity. His businesses in low and moderate income areas. So every
Now you can choose to infuse with migraine prevention delivered differently. Talk to
work with them on some avenue to start a conversations, beginning with, proof of life, proof of condition, location, anything to increase our hope and keep the dialogue going.
While a prisoner swap for Griner with the U.S. remains possible, one analyst says Putin could also be overplaying his hand.
This could backfire as if a lot of the rest of the world being against Russia is not enough. They could now have the global basketball community against them. If I was Vladimir Putin, I would be careful about how I played this.
Now, as worrisome as Brittany Griner's case is, there are 2 other Americans also being held in Russia whose cases are very high on the agendas of U.S. officials. Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed, former U.S. Marines, have been in Russian custody since 2018 and 2019, respectively. Both arrested and convicted for crimes they have emphatically denied, and both, we were told recently, have suffered serious health issues there. Wolf.
Do we know, Brian, how Brittany Griner's family is handling all of this?
They're having a tough time. Her wife, Sherelle Griner, posted a message on Instagram this week and in the last few days saying that they're really in agony, that they're crying all the time, that people tell them to stay busy, but like no amount of activity can really keep them from thinking about her. They're having a really tough time dealing with this, and I guess the lack of information is really frustrating.
Yeah, I hope they let her out and let her out soon. Thanks very much, Brian Todd, for that report. Coming up, Ukrainians whose families sheltered Jews during the Holocaust find some safety in Israel. We're going to share their moving story when we come back.
So when your muscles get tight, your joints get a little creaky, and you're going to have to start a little bit slower. So instead of jumping into that running program, start walking, start going into a little bit of a stretching program, a little bit of, core strengthening program before you get back to that same activity level.
What kind of benefits are we talking about when we're getting active?
Well, if you get up and walk across the room, your brain automatically releases endorphins, and endorphins are natural morphine, so it's natural pain relief. And they also don't have the addictive properties. You don't get the crash after the morphine, so you get this boost to your mood, your boost to your health, your boost to your general happiness. And we especially need that this time of the season. We're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with war across the world, and everyone's starting to get a little bit down. So mentally, getting out, breathing fresh air, getting your heart beating is really important. Another thing is your blood pressure will go down. Your blood sugars will get more easily regulated. So there's really no downside other than injuring yourself to getting out and exercising. So find something fun, find something you can enjoy, something you can stick with. Pick a partner that'll help keep you motivated and keep you working together. That peer pressure can be very helpful. And if you do all those things, you'll be in great shape this spring.
For more on safely returning to an exercise routine, including proper clothing during activities, head on over to avera.org/medical minute.
And Austin will have a final check of the forecast. That's when we return right here on KDLT.
Carfax, you won't have to overpay on a used car again. Shop
taxes, undoubtedly to minimize the chances of prosecution.
Sir, but why had these allegations gotten so little traction?
Well, let's remember when the New York Post first reported on possibly incriminating emails from a Hunter Biden laptop, NPR's managing editor said, we don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. Politico ran a piece 2 weeks before the 2020 election headline, Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo. Dozens of former intel officials say Joe Biden agreed with that now discredited theory. What's more, Twitter blocked anyone from sharing the New York Post reporting and later admitted that was a mistake. Facebook minimized its distribution, but the one skeptical Times now says it has obtained and authenticated emails that appear to have come from Hunter's laptop left in a Delaware repair shop.
Authenticated, that's the key word there. Now, where does this case go from here?
Well, that's not clear. Hunter Biden has denied wrongdoing, and the Times says prosecutors face a number of hurdles in bringing an indictment over Hunter's work in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and for a Chinese energy conglomerate, and might just file civil charges for lobbying violations. But the saga can no longer be dismissed as some right-wing media crusade now that a major newspaper has confirmed these troubling details. Brett?
Howie, as always, thank you.
using to get around these Kremlin censorship blocks, and it was subtitled in English and Russian.
I'm sending this message through various different channels to reach my dear Russian friends and the Russian soldiers serving in Ukraine. There are things that are going on in the world that are being kept from you. I know that your government has told you that this is a war to denazify Ukraine. Denazify Ukraine? This is not true. Ukraine did not start this war. Neither did nationalists or Nazis. Those in power in the Kremlin started this war.
The video is new, and there's signs that it's spreading and going viral. It already has over 2 million views. Schwarzenegger also addresses the human toll with a message for Putin.
3 million Ukrainian refugees, mainly women, children, and elderly, fled their country, and many more are trying to seek to get out. You're also not being told the truth about the consequences of this war on Russia itself. I regret to tell you that thousands of Russian soldiers that have been killed. To President Putin, I say, you started this war. You are leading this war. You can stop this war.
It's more than a public message, it's a type of public diplomacy. The full address runs 9 minutes and has a lot of detailed fact checks. If you're interested in seeing all of it, we'll post it on the Beat with Ari Twitter account or at Ari Melber on Twitter. We'll be right back.
And right now, because we're about to offer you this free book that unlocks the 5 little-known truths we believe baby boomers and seniors should know before buying an annuity, and it's free.
Call 800-832-7507.
As a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report. We researched numerous products and summarized rates and benefits of annuities, all from SIOUX Insurance Company.
800-832-7507. Then 800-832-7507.
Call now.
Need a cleanser that does more? New and improved Cetaphil cleansers are specially formed.
Just keeps getting better.
The Holocaust. That act of salvation now paid forward. Katya is hosting Alla and Lisa after their terrifying journey out of Ukraine. They grow emotional, recalling the last 3 weeks, including nearly 24 hours on a train that came under fire near Kyiv.
We were told to turn off our phones and turn off the lights. So you understand how scary it all was. That even small children, 2 or 3 years old, they understood that something terrible was going on. And even they were silent. They were afraid. We lay like that for an hour and a half, each on top of each other.
Their family ripped apart by war. Lisa and her mom forced to leave Dad Arthur behind. Lisa, you're only 12 years old. Do you feel like you've grown up very quickly in the last few weeks?
Я, может, на взгляд и не поменялась, но...
I may look the same on the outside, but my character has changed because I'm ready for war at all times. The siren starts to go off, and you realize that your life is in danger. You realize that you may never see your family again. That's what changed my character.
Inside Katya's home, a chance to look over why Alla and Lisa ended up in Israel. More than 80 years ago in 1941, Alla's great-grandparents, Ivan and Tatiana Paramount, saved the life of a young Jewish man and Soviet soldier named Viktor Rudnik. Documents detail how they sheltered Rudnik after he escaped from a prisoner of war camp. At one point, risking their own lives by pretending Rudnik was their own son, even while they were forced to host German soldiers in the same house. A letter in the file, written by Ivan Paramount, describes how their town near Kharkiv was bombed in 1943. The similarities, down to the dates, haunting.
The damn Germans bombed us from March 2nd to March 19th, every day from morning to evening. For 3 days, we were hiding in our cellar. On March 5th, a bomb hit our barn.
Alla grows emotional over the parallels to what the Russian army is doing now.
They just destroy them deliberately, destroy them ruthlessly, because it's genocide. It's just genocide of the Ukrainian people.
Katya and Alla's bond started when Alla reached out to the museum a year ago via email, simply seeking more information about her family. Then the war started, and Alla wrote again, asking for help. And after days traveling by train, car, and on foot, they made it to Poland and soon onto the plane to Tel Aviv. For now, Alla and Lisa say they feel safe, taken in by Katya's family like Alla's did for Victor so many years ago.
Get 2.49% APR.
It should be, because if you do a good thing, it will be back to you in one way or another.
Hadass Gold, CNN, Modi'in, Israel.
Thank you, Hadass, for that report. Aaron Burnett out front starts right now.
Tonight, the search for survivors in a bombed-out shelter as Ukrainian forces slow the Russian march. New images from inside the theater where hundreds of civilians had taken shelter before it was hit by a Russian strike. The word children written outside in large letters. The urgent rescue effort, and the U.S. confirming an American citizen has been killed in another strike. What we're learning tonight. President Biden today calling Vladimir Putin a murderous dictator as he prepares to hold a call with China's president. The growing concern, will China give Russia military aid? Also tonight, the stunning turn in the deadly crash involving a college golf team, who investigators now say was driving the other vehicle. The sharp rise in global COVID cases fueled by a highly contagious Omicron subvariant. Dr. Fauci on the fears it's raising here at home. The dangerous way smugglers are hiding drugs on passenger planes without the pilots ever noticing. Now the feds say it's jeopardizing flight safety. And the sibling rivalry as March Madness tips off. Two brothers on opposing sides facing off in tonight's first round.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Ukraine and Russia are entering their fourth week of war tonight, and still unanswered. It's why. What is clear is that this is not the fight the Russians expected. Their casualties are high. Their objectives, according to experts, are mostly unrealized. And their apparent systematic assault on civilians knows no end. In the latest, even signage, apparently visible from the air, warning that children were among those sheltered in a theater basement in Mariupol, failed to prevent its bombing. Thankfully, the shelter held. A top UN official tonight says 726 civilian deaths have been recorded since the war began, including 52 children. The true numbers believed to be higher. Apartment buildings, food storage pantries, all bombed. From a hospital tonight, we'll hear the gut-wrenching stories of survivors. And the stakes only getting higher as President Biden prepares to speak to China's President Xi about all this. We'll begin in Kyiv again tonight with Richard Engel.
With Russia's military advance stalled, its troops in disarray, and thousands of them killed, according to estimates by U.S. officials, Russian forces are now going after civilians, knowingly. In Mariupol, Ukraine's military posting this video of hundreds of people who'd been taking shelter in the basement of a theater. In front and in back were banners in Russian reading "children," big enough to be visible from the sky. Yesterday, Russia bombed it anyway. But tonight, officials say the shelter remained intact. In Chernihiv, Russia struck an apartment building. Among the casualties was an American citizen. No indication the building was targeted. And in Kyiv, firefighters scrambled to rescue survivors after yet another, apparently indiscriminate attack. British intelligence reports Russia is using older, less precise weapons and is resorting to older, cruder tactics, including trying to starve out Kyiv.
Russia has clearly resorted to siege warfare. This was one of the biggest food storage facilities in the entire country. 50,000 tons of food were here, all burned, and it's impossible that this was an accident because it was bombed twice, and then another food storage facility just about a mile from here was also attacked. Do you have a message?
In a hospital bed nearby, Volodymyr was injured while trying to salvage food from the burned-out warehouses. I want this war to be over so I can see my family, he said. Down the hall is Katerina, who sold milk and yogurt at an open market. She was in a basement and went outside for a moment to wash a blanket when a Russian shell exploded. It tore off her leg, and shrapnel went through her back and into a lung. Before, I had a house and a job. Now I'm disabled and have no home. And why? For what? She asked, and began to curse Russia. President Zelenskyy visited another hospital in Kyiv, meeting the family we met last week. All of them shot in their car at close range by Russian troops as they were trying to escape. Zelenskyy also addressed Germany's parliament and asked for help to stop Russia from erecting a new Berlin Wall, separating the free world from tyranny and repression.
All right, Richard joining us now. And Richard, you and your team have been in Kyiv for quite some time right now. Can you give us an idea what it's like to live, to work, to exist in a place that is a bullseye as far as the Russians are concerned?
The city has changed quite a bit over the last several weeks. When we first arrived here, Ukrainian soldiers were very nervous. When we would pull up to a checkpoint, they would raise their weapons at us. They were asking a lot of questions. Now they feel that they're winning and they're a lot more relaxed. When we pull up to the checkpoints, the soldiers are smiling, they're talking to us, asking us personal questions. A few bars and restaurants have even started to open up. The only question really on people's minds here is, how will Vladimir Putin react now that he has his back against the wall?
Well, we continue to wish you and all our colleagues in the field there safe passage. Thank you, Richard. Some of the first people to make it out of the beleaguered city of Mariupol have now made it to safety and are sharing their stories of struggle and survival. Molly Hunter spoke with some of them.
For 16 days, the Russians have besieged, starved out the city of Mariupol. From above, it's unrecognizable. 80 to 90% of the buildings destroyed, according to city officials. 350,000 residents trapped inside. On the southeast corner of the country, on the Black Sea, the strategic port is on the Russian land route to Crimea. Now, survivors, Mariupol residents 17-year-old Yulia and her mother, also Yulia, are part of the first group of civilians to make it out alive.
When you know that any moment you can be killed, and you can choose to be killed moving from this town or to be killed sitting in a room.
They had no heat, no electricity, no water.
We together cooked borscht, and I was scared.
The windows and doors on their apartment blew out on March 4th.
The bombs were falling, and they were falling from the airplanes.
Their home completely destroyed on March 12th. At age 17, Yulia can distinguish the different sounds of Russian aerial attacks.
You can hear the mines when they're falling and when they're close, because it's like this sound.
In the last few days, the city council says 30,000 people have escaped the city, but not on humanitarian corridors. Convoys of private cars, 6,500 in recent days, leaving from what was thought to be a safe meeting point, the now destroyed drama theater.
Driving together is safer. Like if someone hits one car, and another would help, and like with everything, like together it's safer.
Racing out of Mariupol, Yulia says they went through more than a dozen checkpoints. She says Russian soldiers took her phone, went through it, deleted all of the photos she had taken of the destruction. Lester?
It is amazing what folks are going through. Molly, thank you. With the UN now putting the number of refugees at more than 3.2 million, an astonishing number, some of them are finding shelter in churches, hoping their prayers are being heard. Gabe Gutierrez is in Lviv.
Tonight in Ukraine, faith is being tested. At Lviv's Christ Fellowship Church, Reverend Igor Ivanishan has opened his doors to refugees.
It seems surreal, like movie, except you see real people suffering. They hug me and they cry and they cannot believe bombs are not falling on them.
Bogdan Priyanko lost touch with his wife and 4 children days ago after shelling damaged the home where they'd been staying without him near Kyiv. I began to pray to God, he says. I asked God to save them. Please take my life, but I want them to be safe. He says he couldn't meet up with his family because of Russian checkpoints.
You don't know where your family is?
Yeah, I know that they're not in Ukraine, but don't know where.
Outside the church, Victoria Ladmarova can't let go of Emma and Lila. Why aren't they closing the skies, she says. The Russians are destroying everything. Another refugee tells us he saw his friend shot by Russian troops. We've blurred the picture he showed us. It's enough to test anyone's faith. But in this war, some prayers are answered. After we first spoke, today Bogdan finally got a hold of his wife and kids. They're somewhere in Poland, en route to Germany.
I said to God, you know, God, give my life, but save life of my children and help them, you know, and He helped. I'm really, really happy.
Many more families are also keeping the faith as they prepare to pack into this church for yet another night. Lester.
All right, Gabe, thank you. President Biden had more harsh words today for Russian President Putin as concern grows that Russia could turn to China for a lifeline to continue its assault. Kristen Welker is at the White House tonight. Kristen, the president not mincing words today.
He isn't, Lester. That's right. President Biden called Vladimir Putin a murderous dictator. And tomorrow he's going to have what's expected to be a really tough phone call with Chinese President Xi. Just today, the Secretary of State said the administration is concerned China, a key Russian partner, is considering directly assisting Russia with military equipment. And earlier this week, the National Security Advisor warned his Chinese counterpart there would be serious consequences if China stepped in to help Russia. Now, remember, Lester, China has not condemned the invasion, and just like much of Europe, they continue to buy Russian oil and gas. Meanwhile, an administration official tells us that new U.S. military aid to Ukraine will be sent out as fast as possible. Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker at the White House tonight. Thank you. A shocking revelation in that deadly collision of a pickup truck and a van carrying a college golf team in Texas. Officials say a 13-year-old was driving the pickup. Morgan Chesky has late details for us.
Tonight, stunning new details in the fiery collision killing 9, including 7 members of a college golf team. Federal investigators revealing the driver of the pickup truck that struck the team van wasn't old enough to legally drive.
A 13-year-old child was behind the wheel of the pickup truck.
Federal agents with the NTSB say the 13-year-old was driving with a 38-year-old man in the passenger seat. Both died at the scene. Investigators say new evidence suggests what could have caused the pickup to veer suddenly into the other lane.
A front tire, which was a spare tire, had failed, resulted in the vehicle pulling hard to the left and crossing into the opposing lane.
The parents of 22-year-old Jackson Zinn, who died at the scene, say they're shocked.
It's still tragic, but I don't want to get hung up on the details. I want to celebrate my son's life.
The University of the Southwest sharing their heartbreak.
Our institution is crushed and broken, but strong.
But tonight, a glimmer of hope. After being airlifted from a fiery, mangled scene, Dayton Price and Hayden Underhill, the only survivors on board the team van, are improving in a Lubbock, Texas hospital.
And tonight, authorities stress that having a 13-year-old behind the wheel is a clear violation of the law. They tell me that this investigation is ongoing, as many questions remain. Lester.
Morgan Chesky, thank you. In 60 seconds, our investigation into drug smuggling on planes and the safety concerns we're uncovering.
Again, is a state championship title with his team, the Zesmet Bulldogs. In Aberdeen, Sarah Parkin, Dakota News Now.
Well, we've had some pretty awesome weather this week. We officially welcome in spring over the weekend. Can we expect some nicer weather? We've got full forecast coming up right after this.
The only news in prime time.
Originally created by the Soviet Union, known as SA-8s and the more advanced S-300s. Why is that so important?
Well, this is the way to impose a no-fly zone, but imposing it from the ground as opposed to trying to control it from the air with NATO aircraft. And the Ukrainians have some systems now. You mentioned the Stinger. Yesterday's package announced by the president included hundreds of more Stinger missiles. That's great. But as you say, these are relatively short range. The good news is that among our 30 NATO allies, there are some allies who still have Soviet vintage equipment with which the Ukrainians are very familiar. So no training required. They know how to maintain these systems and so forth. So now the path forward is to get these Soviet vintage air defense systems from U.S. allies into the hands of the Ukrainians and then backfill the Allied systems with more modern systems. So this is really a two-edged advantage for us. We get the right systems into the hands of the Ukrainians, and we up-arm our own allies.
And those systems should allow Ukraine to at least target, if not hit, Russian missiles and perhaps jets flying at a higher elevation. But we've seen another tactic, of course, in the last few days, last week or so, Russian troops moving around less, in part because of these American and NATO weapons, and using artillery more to unfortunately great effect. You can see the worst effects of that kind of artillery in Mariupol. It's scorched earth, clearly targeting civilian neighborhoods in an indiscriminate way. Now, the U.S. has sent some artillery rounds to Ukraine, but can the U.S. NATO weapons that they've provided to Ukraine really stop this Russian artillery?
The way to attack these Russian artillery systems, and I think what you see there in Mariupol, by the way, is just a prototype. It's an early example of the Russian campaign plan to besiege the larger Ukrainian cities, so Kyiv and Kharkiv in the east. But the way to attack this siege campaign is by way of attacking its supply lines. And here the systems that the U.S. is providing now to the Ukrainians, to include the additional systems announced yesterday, are effective ways to get at the supply lines. The supply lines run out of Belarus and out of Russia. They're long, they're vulnerable, they're not well guarded, they're largely road bound, and the Javelins and the Stingers are perfect systems to take the fight to those supply lines.
Zooming out, we were speaking to you earlier today, and you told us that these weapons, while exacting a higher cost on the Russians, will not be decisive. Explain that.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're actually headed towards a stalemate, with the Russians having a lot of firepower and the Ukrainians, enabled by us with the kind of systems that the president announced yesterday, but these systems are not going to prove a decisive edge for our Ukrainian partners. You know, at the end of the day, Nick, even in a prolonged stalemate, typically willpower on behalf of the Ukrainians will probably defeat, in my view, the firepower of the Russians. And that, I think, unfortunately, in this prolonged, brutal conflict that lays ahead, will be the equation.
And Doug, I've only got about 40 seconds left, so quickly, is there a risk of escalation, do you think, as the U.S., as NATO provides more weapons?
Of course. I mean, one of the tactics that we haven't seen the Russians use yet is to try to interdict NATO supply lines. And of course, those supply lines begin in NATO countries themselves along the western border with Ukraine. So if Russia were to try to assemble an interdiction campaign, that moves that campaign much closer to NATO borders. And that's one risk of escalation.
Doug Lute, appreciate it as always. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nick.
In the day's other news, the U.S. House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly today to suspend normal trade relations with Russia and with Belarus over the war in Ukraine. The vote was 424 in favor, with 8 Republicans voting no. This helped set the stage for President Biden to enact higher tariffs on Russian imports. The measure now heads to the Senate for final passage. Former California governor and actor Arnold Schwarzenegger posted a passionate 9-minute video online today demanding Russian President Putin stop the war in Ukraine. He also told the Russian people that they are being fed misinformation and warned them of the reality of Putin's actions.
It is a humanitarian crisis. Because of its brutality, Russia is now isolated from the society of nations. You're also not being told the truth about the consequences of this war on Russia itself. I regret to tell you that thousands of Russian soldiers that have been killed.
Schwarzenegger, who was born in Austria, said that his father had a similar traumatic experience as a soldier with the Nazi army during World War II. On Wall Street, stocks rallied for a third straight day, even as oil prices jumped back above $100 a barrel. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 417 points to close at 34,481. The Nasdaq rose 178 points, and the S&P 500 added 54. The number of Americans who file for unemployment benefits hit a fresh low for the year. More evidence of a strong rebound in the U.S. job market. The Labor Department reported that new jobless claims fell last week to 214,000. That is down 15,000 from the previous week. And just over 1.4 million Americans were collecting unemployment benefits in early March. That is a 50-year low. White House COVID-19 response coordinator Jeffrey Zients will be stepping down next month after guiding the country through mass vaccinations and multiple variants. President Biden tapped Dr. Ashish Jha, who leads Brown University School of Public Health, to succeed him. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said it's a good time to make that transition.
Right now, we're at a point in the process where we have all of the tools and we know the operational systems that are needed. And so right now, it's the appropriate time. And Jeff, of course, made this decision on his own. He extended a couple of times to stay longer through some ups and downs in the pandemic.
We'll talk to one of the president's other top COVID advisors, Dr. Anthony Fauci, right after the news summary. A cleanup effort is underway in northeastern Japan a day after a 7.4 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Fukushima, killing 4 people. Power was restored today to most of the 2 million people who lost electricity. Some residents woke this morning to collapsed roofs and smashed furniture. Officials also reported disruptions to transport.
The Tohoku Shinkansen bullet train was derailed between the Shiroishi-Zao station and the Fukushima station, but there were no injuries and all passengers have been rescued.
The same area suffered a deadly quake and tsunami 11 years ago, which killed around 18,000 people and caused a nuclear reactor meltdown. Back in this country.
Degrees online from the world's best universities for today's busy lives.
Your Select Ford today and get $1,000 bonus cash in addition to all public offers.
That definitely made an impact on the election.
Okay.
The suppressing that news. And it's not a question of whether it was criminal or not.
Right.
Just the facts alone were shameful. And most Americans would immediately see what was going on and how repulsive it was. And it would have had an effect. The issue of criminality is a different issue.
We'll get to that at some point. The video we just showed, the carnage.
So, Rob, in light of this headline about the sagging morale because the losses are higher than Putin had expected and they're struggling to replace them, you have been tracking day in and day out losses among Russian troops. What stands out to you now?
So, the figures, it's hard to know exactly how much they've lost because obviously any estimate is going to be very inexact right now. But we know that after the first week of this war, Russia lost more soldiers than it did during the war in Georgia, than it did in Ukraine in 2014, 2015, and it has in Syria over the last 7 years. All of that combined. So it's a really significant loss. And in particular, we're seeing really heavy losses in Russia's elite units. So the VDV, the airborne forces, Spetsnaz, other kind of elite formations that, these casualties are very difficult to reconstitute or to sustain.
Because these are the elite units. These are highly trained people and hard to replace. So, General Kimmett, it comes in the context of Antony Blinken saying that because of this, there could be an escalation. Whether that escalation is chemical or some sort of tactical nuclear is where the conversation then occurs. And to that front, Putin's closest ally, the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, made a nuclear threat while doing an interview with a Japanese television channel today, which is highly relevant. Let me play it.
Russia
will not lose in this war. You are 100% convinced of this too. How the war ends, if one of the parties wins, Japan knows better than I do.
I mean, to a Japanese television station, General, obviously a threat referencing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Do you take this seriously?
I think that anybody that doesn't take it seriously should relook at what we've seen over the past couple of weeks. Every assumption about what Putin wouldn't do, he's done. So I think we need to take it seriously, but personally I think he will ramp up at the conventional level before he moves on to chemical and nuclear. Yes, he's lost a lot of troops, but historically that's not a big number. They used to lose 12,000 in a day during World War II. But But I think what he's just going to do is replace those soldiers with more soldiers and double down on the artillery and rocket strikes to keep the mission going.
So on that front, Rob, doubling down on artillery strikes, rocket strikes, Human Rights Watch says Russian forces attacked residential areas in Mykolaiv with cluster munition rockets in 3 separate attacks in the last week. Those are widely condemned weapons. Now, you also have been tracking what weapons the Russians are using, where, and what weapons are being destroyed. What are you seeing now there?
Sure. So, earlier in the conflict, we saw plenty of evidence of cluster munitions being used in Kharkiv, where the really heaviest bombardment's been occurring. It includes Smerch, Uragan, multiple launch rocket systems, aviation bombs that can also dispense cluster munitions. So it's pretty clear it's a theme that we've already seen before. What's happening in Mykolaiv, we already saw that in Kharkiv. The issue is that Mykolaiv is a really important city, and that if Russia wants to get to Odessa, they really need to take that city. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to make it to Odessa. So it's become this kind of strategic problem for Russia, and part of it is limiting their advance.
So, General Commit, Arnold Schwarzenegger put out a video today. And, I think it captured a lot of people's attention. It was very well done. It talked about how his father was broken both physically and mentally by the siege of Leningrad. And he talks about how angry his father was when Arnold, as a teenager, heroized a Russian weightlifter. And the context of this story was for Arnold Schwarzenegger to share his admiration for Russians and try to break through to them with the truth about the war and Putin. So here's part of it when he actually addressed the Russian soldiers that we're talking about in this conversation. Here he is.
I don't want you to be broken like my father. This is not the war to defend Russia that your grandfathers or your great-grandfathers fought. This is an illegal war. Your lives, your limbs, your futures are being sacrificed for a senseless war condemned by the entire world.
General, will something like that break through to any of its intended audience?
If it gets through is the first question. We used to talk about the great Chinese firewall, but if you take a look what's happening in Russia right now, we're starting to see the great Russian firewall. If that can get through that firewall and talking to troops, I think it would have an effect. As important, it might have an effect on public reaction to what's happening. I'm just afraid that while it's well intended, it'll never get through Putin's firewall.
Yeah, that, of course, is the big question. General and Rob, thank you both very much for your expertise and thoughts tonight. And out front next, the ex of an oligarch who was called Putin's banker. Now she is speaking out about what Putin's inner circle is like. Countess Alexander Tolstoy is my guest next. And children of war, some dead, others maimed and scarred for life. We're going to take you inside a children's hospital treating the very youngest victims of this war.
As a struggling actor, I need all the breaks that I can get. At Liberty Mutual.
Cut.
Line.
Cut. Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance so you only pay for what you need.
Cut. Liberty. Am I?
This guy's a monster. Take
planet, help it grow. About this for a long time, but if we want to continue this, as I call it, tiptoeing back to normality, we want to make sure that we do everything within our power to prevent the kinds of things that will set us back. I think psychologically, the country is just not ready to get set back again. But there are things that we can do to prevent that. And that's the reason why we continue to stress the importance of vaccination and boosting when you are vaccinated.
Just quickly, 2 other things on this. Is there something different, or what is different about the BA.2 variant that people should be aware of? How different is it from Omicron?
It has one very important difference and then a lot of similarities with the standard Omicron. The difference is that it has a slight to moderate transmission advantage. Namely, it is more transmissible. The thing about it that's the same, it doesn't appear to be any more severe, and it doesn't seem to evade immune responses, either induced by the vaccine or by prior infection. So the one critical difference is that increased transmissibility fitness.
And the other quick question, Dr. Fauci, is we did hear from Pfizer this week that they're looking to get emergency authorization for a second booster shot for individuals who are 65 or over. Is your thinking that that's something people should be prepared for?
I think that's certainly conceivable, much more so among the elderly than I think the general population. The most important thing that we need to do, that we always do, is look at the data. And in order for that to be authorized on an emergency basis for anyone, the FDA would have to carefully examine the data and take a look at, is the risk benefit in the favor of the benefit of doing that. But Judy, I would not be surprised that at least among some set of people, particularly the elderly, that within a reasonable period of time, can't tell exactly when, we will need to boost those people.
Dr. Fauci, I want to turn you now to this debate underway that's just come up in recent days about funding for COVID. The White House, as you know, was asking for $30 billion. It's now, I think, $22 billion. It had to come out of the big government spending bill. Now there's a frantic effort to get it passed, but it's met with oppositions. Republicans are saying, you've already spent $6 trillion on COVID. They're saying this to the administration, or that the government has. Why do you need another $22 billion? What do you say to that?
Well, we do need it, Judy. I mean, the money that has been allocated has been well spent, and we've had a lot of very important successes with that resources with regard to the vaccinations, the drugs, the tests, all the things that have actually worked well. But we are running out of money. This is not make-believe. I mean, when we look at the things that we've already started that we need to complete, the talk about whether or not we'll need a boost and what kind of boost. What about the issue of pan-coronavirus vaccines that will protect us from what might be the next iteration? So this is reality. We are running out of money, and if we don't get money reasonably soon, there are things that we were hoping we would continue that we're going to have to stop, and there are things that we were hopefully able to initiate that will not be able to initiate. That's a big concern.
Well, what we're hearing from Republicans, and you know this very well, Dr. Fauci, they're saying, wait a minute, we don't know where all that $6 trillion has gone. We'd like some accounting for that. We know some of it was diverted, some of it may not be spent. Is that a reasonable request for Congress to be making right now before they appropriate more money?
Well, I mean, accountability is always important, but there is accountability there, and that's the point that's being made, that we have accountability. But right now, we really do need the money, because within a couple of months, there are going to be things that are going to have to stop. But we're all in favor of accountability. No one is going to argue about that.
The other point that some progressive Democrats were making, and this ended up being one of the reasons the COVID money had to be pulled out of the big spending bill, is they're saying, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to see this money taken from states that were going to be able to do their own version of pandemic spending. Is that something that frankly, there should have been more flexibility on?
Well, I don't think I could comment on that. There was a lot of negotiations back and forth between the governors and the Congress about, I believe it was about $15 billion that was in there that was coming out of the states. And there was back and forth about whether or not that was appropriate and what the result of that would be. But I don't think.
News for you. Don't buy an annuity until you understand the pros and cons of annuity.
He walked out of the Cook County Jail at around 8 p.m. Chicago time.
The Keatings say he had a healthy, strong heart. In November, Joseph had his COVID booster shot.
Of course, we're going to do the vaccine. We can't wait.
The reaction was mild.
He was just tired, you know.
Family monitored vitals, brought meals, and checked in.
He had no shortness of breath. He had no chest pain. He had no heart flutter.
5 days later, Joseph was not returning text messages.
Drove over to his apartment, and we found him passed away in his recliner.
An extensive autopsy conducted at Sanford in Sioux Falls provided details.
And they listed myocarditis as the cause, with a contributing factor of the COVID Pfizer vaccine. So we were just in shock.
The National Institutes of Health continues to study the details of Joseph's death. Clinical investigator Stephen Hewitt says, at this time, we have no comment. The case is currently under review. The 26-year-old man wanted to someday donate his body to science.
He wanted to be the cadaver on everybody's table, you know. So it's sad that he wasn't able to do that dream because they needed to do this total autopsy. So now he donated his heart to science.
He found a silver lining in all that pain.
All that pain, yeah.
It's important to note just how rare Joseph's case was. A CDC study found only about 1 in 80,000 young people developed myocarditis, and only a small percentage of those were fatal. In Sioux Falls, Beth Warden, Dakota News Now.
The South Dakota Department of Health releasing a statement regarding this story, saying, quote, the CDC has indicated there is an increased risk of myocarditis as a side effect following the receipt of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine compared to the background rate of myocarditis. The risk is increased for adolescents and young adults, males and persons receiving their second COVID-19 vaccine dose.
And Sanford Health says, quote, our condolences go out to the Keating family for the loss of their son. Myocarditis is a known complication of COVID-19. Myocarditis can also be a very rare side effect from COVID-19 vaccination. The vaccine is still the best defense against COVID-19. Turning things over now to a check of the forecast, and not too bad of a day out there.
Really nice one.
From the pandemic and back-to-back.
Could satisfy it by getting crypto the same way everyone else does.
You can barely tell the photo was even edited until you zoom in and see the different shades of blue and posters that they forgot to flip over. So that was a little embarrassing. But listen, everybody deserves a third chance. And the teachers union gave it another shot. This time, something a little easier. Posting a simple hashtag, right? Can't mess that up. Stand with Ukraine. Right? No. They misspelled Ukraine. And these are the people who want more money to quote-unquote teach our kids. They can't.
There are still roughly 30 companies that have remained in operation in Russia, including the parent company of brands like Reebok and Carvel Ice Cream, as well as LG Electronics and, surprise, surprise, Koch Industries. As Dana Milbank writes in the Washington Post, people who want Russia to end their war against Ukraine might want to avoid those products. In particular, Koch Industries owns several name brands like Brawny paper towels, Dixie cups, quilted northern toilet paper, and Vanity Fair napkins. But let's just be clear. Koch's paper towels, toilet paper, and napkins cannot wipe away the blood Russia has spilled on Ukrainian soil. And as President Zelenskyy said clearly just yesterday, the Russian market is flooded with Ukrainian blood.
All American companies must leave Russia from their market, leave their market immediately, because it is flooded with our blood. I am asking to make sure that the Russians do not receive a single penny that they use to destroy people in Ukraine.
And let me just add that the history of Koch Industries is telling. As Jane Mayer reminded us this week, the Koch family started out by building refineries for Stalin and Hitler. In other words, the muck-covered apple does not fall far from the tree. And up next, if you think Putin's unrestrained brutality in Ukraine is something new, you haven't been paying enough attention. How this war is tragically turning into everything Putin watchers predicted. Next on The Readout.
It's the hottest seller's market in years. If you're thinking of selling your...
Does it matter?
It's a great question. I think it's a easy meme that sounds awful. I'm no military expert, and so, you know, war criminal means that you've broken sort of accepted rules of engagement in war.
Well, yeah,
However,
it means you've targeted civilians. It means you've
Right.
tortured people. It means you've done all these things, which, sure, Slobodan Milosevic and some other people were dragged before The Hague, but
right.
the
That
justice...
seem...
Yeah, the justice Russians worry about is far less dainty than The Hague.
I can't imagine someone serving Putin a process letter saying, we're suing you for war crimes. So no, I think you're right. I don't think that this is going to really directly affect Putin at all. I think the message, however, is more of an indirect one. And when you hear these people talk about war crimes and whether he's a war criminal, it's really about rallying, or it's an easy way to paint Putin in a more clearer light to sway public opinion. So war criminal leads you to Milosevic or Hitler or all these things. He's not just like a dictator doing bad things. He's a dictator doing war crimes and killing infants and innocent civilians. And it's a way to sort of rally, you know, bipartisan level people to get behind and say, okay, so this is, as you said perfectly, serious time. And it makes all the other media
it would make sense, though, if he hadn't done it so many times before and nobody cared.
Well, you're right, and we didn't really pay that close attention. I mean, I guess most recently he did this in Aleppo, right, in Syria, but that was under the pretext of clearing out ISIS, which sounded good to us. It sounded good to me, and of course there was lots of horrible things, but we turned, you know, a blind eye to it. But you're absolutely right. He's got a horrible history of doing really bad things. I don't think that he's gone quite this far.
Well, hold on. I mean, in Syria, he gassed people, and he certainly didn't gas ISIS at the time. So we're looking sort of at the various pictures of all the places that he's done this in. In Chechnya, he certainly did it. His security services were responsible for bombing apartment buildings in his own capital.
I'm not going to argue
yeah, I know.
what he's doing is I
understand. But you make a good point that it sort of becomes this catch-all phrase, and it's like, okay, it gives President Biden an excuse for being strong, and this is this rallying cry. But it goes back, there seems to be this lack of sort of questioning the narrative and why things matter and what bad things could happen during this war, especially when you listen, for example, to folks talking about a no-fly zone in the sort of crazy narrative. Why isn't there a no-fly zone? Take a listen.
Okay, so they won't stop importing Russian oil, and they won't even have a no-fly zone?
Why rule out the no-fly zone? Why not make Putin think it's possible?
Now, the argument against the no-fly zone is, look, you're going to end up with World War III. And I wonder, looking back on, say, World War II with Poland, you saw France and Britain really doing the bare minimum. And ultimately, we see Poland becomes the invasion of Poland by the Nazis and then the Soviets becomes this gateway to World War II.
Is there not enough sobriety of what could happen if we keep arming the Ukrainians and do more and have a no-fly zone?
I mean, this is the age of sort of bullet pointing, sort of very complicated issues, right? You know, I saw former Ambassador McFaul put it, I think, well, I said, let's stop calling it a no-fly zone. Let's call it the start of a war against Russia, because a no-fly zone means that we're shooting down Russian jets.
Right, so no, it's a great point, but why doesn't the media call it that?
Well, I mean, because I think it's candidly, a lot of people in the media are lazy. They hear the no-fly zone and they just sort of repeat it. The other issue I think that Brianna Keilar brought up there is, you know, this warning of World War III. You know, we're already at war, right? I mean, not the United States. World War III, there was Axis and Allies. There was two clear sides, and I think World War III is a shorthand for, you know, the fear of nuclear war. It's not so much World War III because Russia doesn't really have any allies right now.
Oh, except for China.
It's just that well, they're playing it. They're playing both sides. They're not truly allies, but they haven't really gone all in. They're keeping their power to, well, I mean, they're playing both sides. They don't want to destabilize, but that's again a very complicated conversation. The real issue is that Putin seems to be lost his marbles and he's in possession of nuclear weapons, and that's the game changer, right? That's the thing that makes us all act very, very cautiously because we don't want to be carrying around potassium tablets because of radiation.
And it goes to this question when you talk about, you know, do we give the MiGs to Ukraine, whether or not the MiGs can be flown, whether or not there's pilots, whether or not there's fuel, all these other questions that don't seem to be asking. Colby, somebody who always does ask the questions, we appreciate it, my friend. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps at this point of the evening you are tired and cranky. I am as well. Let's blame daylight savings time. It's true. They are to blame. The U.S. Senate passed a bill that is going to fix that.
Intelligence officer, SPYX.com analyst, and a director of corporate security at a global biotech company. So this is a pretty brave mission that the U.S. government pulled off. Was it worth it?
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for having me on your show. You know what? This is something that is done normally with our liaison partners and countries that need our support. And a lot of the training that is provided, it's really some of the best training in the world. And really some of the reports that we've received about what happened after 2014, about CIA's paramilitary officers entering Ukraine and helping them train and provide that support, you know, I think it's necessary. And this is something that happens regularly around the world. And I'm glad to hear that, you know, these reports have come out and that we were doing something, being preemptive, being proactive, and trying to be preventative. And really, at the end of the day, it's about protecting our sources, protecting our methods. And a lot of the training that we do, it's clandestine, it's secret. And that's why we really haven't known what was going on there before the last few weeks.
How big of a difference was the CIA paramilitary training? And do you think it has more to do with that training or more to do with the ferocious and patriotic spirit of the Ukrainian people?
I definitely think that the patriotism and the ferocious spirit of the Ukrainians, that's really from what I've been able to tell, first and foremost, what they have to their advantage. Also, having been through a lot of CIA training, whether it's at the farm or other locations, it really is the way that they train people. They want to make the training so difficult, so stressful, and so strenuous that anything that you see or do or experience in the real world will hopefully be easy. Now, it's a different matter, of course, in a war zone environment, but I can attest, after being in the agency for 13 years, nothing I really did in the real world was as difficult as what I was put through in training, and I think that's a really good way to train people.
How do you think I'd do at the farm, Ryan?
You know, it just depends. It's mental. You know, a lot of people think that it's a lot of physical training, and there's a little bit of that aspect, but it really is a mental education. And, you know, you never know. You have to be able to live and work in the gray. People that have a black and white mentality or a black and white perspective of the world oftentimes struggle to get through the farm. But if you can deal with ambiguity, if you live and work in the gray in terms of your mindset and your outlook of the world, you're on the right track and you'll be more successful.
Thank you so much. Ryan Hillsberg, we appreciate your service.
Thank you so much.
Vladimir Putin's mounting losses in Ukraine have him fuming and embarrassed. His yes men in the Kremlin lied to him and had him believing Kyiv would fall within a week, so that didn't happen. And now he's not just losing battles there, he's losing the war of public opinion in Russia. Many of his own people are revolting against him. We've been seeing his lackeys manhandling peaceful protesters, and now Putin himself is starting to lash out.
The Russian people will always be able to distinguish true patriots from bastards and traitors and simply spit them out like a fly that accidentally flew into the mouth. Spit them out. I am convinced that such a natural and necessary cleansing of society will only strengthen our country.
He's hurt. He's losing this war right now, even though it is kind of a stalemate. His economy's in free fall, and a wounded animal is a dangerous animal because it acts unpredictably. So what's next? Mike Rogers is a former House Intelligence Chairman, and Kirk Lippold is a retired Navy commander. All right, Mike, is this a Stalin situation where he's threatening to purge his country in order to consolidate and keep power?
Oh, absolutely. And his language is exactly the language Stalin used when he instituted the purge. And remember, just 6 to 8 years before Stalin did that in the late 30s, he was starving the Ukrainian people, as all reports and commissions have found, on purpose. It was a genocide to try to eliminate anyone that was opposed to the larger Soviet regime. And if, again, you listen to his language, it's very terrifying. It is exactly the language that Stalin was using. The fifth column, which means he's saying that there are saboteurs and international influence into Russia, and the only way to get at that is to have this, in his words, cleansing. And that should terrify just about everybody. And just one quick note about activities training these folks and why they're so effective. Imagine the best of Delta Force, Rangers, Marine Special Forces, all of those folks came together after full careers in a particular agency to train people in counterinsurgency. We've been in a counterinsurgency fight for about 20 years. Imagine all that knowledge, expertise, combat experience going into the heads of these Ukrainians who are really putting it to the Russians now. I just thought I'd make that point. Really important.
God bless America. Thank you so much. It is St. Patrick's Day, so what do New Yorkers think of our big Irish President Joe Biden?
What is the most Irish thing about President Joe Biden?
Here's a little bit, maybe an Irish nose. That pale, freckly skin.
Sleeping all the time, seems like he's drunk.
We're going to continue following that as well, because he's imprisoning people like yourself who are politicians who are trying to make Russia.
And the verdict is coming on Tuesday, March 22nd.
Yeah, and you know what? But what South Africa's regime and what Putin's regime have in common? Fascists. They're fascist dictatorships, and that's how we should refer to them. These are not governments of the people. Vladimir Karmarza, thank you. I always appreciate talking with you. And up next, Corinne Skye was a second-year medical student from Zimbabwe studying in Ukraine until she was forced to flee the war-torn country. She is here tonight to tell us about her harrowing experience and the discrimination that she experienced at the border. We'll be right back.
As a Main Street bank, PNC has helped over 7
understood our needs.
Here, look at the high temperature on Sunday, 74 degrees. That's going to be about 25 degrees above average. And then again, that chance of rain Monday afternoon into Tuesday with a little bit of snow mixing in on the backside. And then after that, the sun comes back out and temperatures stay in the 50s. Stick with.
But culture should come quickly thereafter because it's the type of resource that you can't replace.
What is your main focus right now?
So far, we're focused on technical advice about packing and crating, about best practices for evacuation of archival materials, for example. We're trying to work more on logistics of getting materials to Ukraine as best we can through channels in Europe. And then finally, our later focus will be on this issue of documenting damage and helping colleagues do that in a way that they can be used for future evidence for accountability.
The immediate emergency and later accountability. The latter means gathering evidence for possible war crimes violations under the 1954 Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property in armed conflict, to which both Russia and Ukraine are signatories. Some of the monitoring and documentation is occurring here at the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab at the Virginia Museum of Natural History. Director Hayden Bassett, an archaeologist, now uses remote sensing and satellites as eyes on the war in Ukraine.
Our job, as we see it, is to minimize the time it takes from going from identification to response, because that's that window where cultural heritage is most vulnerable.
Bassett showed us a database map of cultural sites.
As you can see right here, the blue dots represent an individual cultural heritage site.
Some 20,000 sites in all, using a broad definition of culture to include statues, libraries, churches, cemeteries, and much more. He then focused on the Ivankiev Museum, about 50 miles north of Kyiv.
This is February 14th, 2022. And this is the museum here. As you can see, there's a lot of snow cover on the ground, but clearly identifiable that the museum is intact.
The next image is from February 27th.
In the center is that same building, minus the roof, and the interior of the building has clearly been destroyed. But I would like you to focus a little bit broader surrounding the building. And as you'll notice, there aren't any impacts immediately surrounding that building. The other structures, residential, are still intact.
That could be evidence, he says, of direct targeting of the museum. In the meantime, work on the ground continues, ever more dangerous. Ihor Poshivailo says there's no choice.
All our cultural heritage, all our collections, they help us
not only to rediscover our past, but to strengthen our identity, to feel us as one nation with common past. This is very important to fight for our future.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.
So many awful things coming from this war. And on the NewsHour Online, many Americans have seen the skyrocketing price of gasoline at the pump. We spoke with an oil expert today about what's behind these high prices, how long this may last, and what you can do to save some money. That's on our website at pbs.org/newshour. And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you. Please stay safe, and we'll see you.
Is here with her 2 daughters. How do you feel being here?
Oh, very perfecto. At least.
Other than perfect, she says. They gave us medicine and new beds. They fed us. Then added, it's very, very, very good. The city of Brasov preparing for even more refugees who the mayor believes will need even more support and possibly stay for a long time.
If you're a mother with a child, you can come to Brasov. We can offer you a job. We can offer, and we are discussing about solutions for daycare for children, how to integrate them in the educational system.
The city planning the future, but meeting basic needs too, coordinating with local restaurants, providing thousands of meals. Today, on St. Patrick's Day, prepared by Dean's Irish Pub. Luck of the Irish.
It's more than just providing meals, and we're kind of providing hope to them, and they do need that, and we can see that on their faces, and I think that's really important.
Tatiana Kiruchina and Natalia Zhivyulka, mother and daughter from Mykolaiv, got here only 3 days ago. If not for the help here, she says, I don't think our nerves could have taken it. There were air raids day and night. We couldn't eat. We couldn't sleep. In Mykolaiv, she says, the planes were flying right over our heads. Flying, flying, flying. I can't find words to explain. It's very scary. Antonina Mikhailova has a simple wish. In my old age, I only wanted peace and prosperity, she says. Then added, I like everything to be okay, but for now, it's not.
Cities like Brasov are preparing for many more refugees in the weeks to come, and then now starting to prepare to integrate them into their economies for months, if not years to come. Aaron?
Miguel, thank you very much from Brasov tonight. And next, an American basketball star detained in Russia. Now going to be there a lot longer.
Why do dermatologists choose Dove?
The Dove Beauty Bar is gentle, not only cleans, hydrates my skin.
As a dermatologist, I want what's best for
Joe Biden has the luck of the Irish.
Well, I'm hoping that he has the luck of the Irish because I think he needs it.
No.
Well, clearly, he got into the office somehow.
He's putting this entire country down on his luck.
He got a lot of hate coming his way.
Every Irish has a bit of luck.
He is lucky.
If you think you're lucky, Joe, you're lucky.
I think so.
If it wasn't for St. Patrick, he wouldn't be president.
Yeah. Does Joe Biden make you drink more?
Joe Biden will likely make me drink a few pints of Guinness today.
No, because it's impossible to drink more than I already do.
Beer! Beer! Give us a beer!
I've had 2 Jaeger bombs.
A lot of the concerns that people had were, oh, I've got a Nigerian passport, I've got a Zimbabwean passport, how will I be able to enter the border into Poland when I don't have an EU passport? So once the information was being released in real time, I was getting the information and I was sharing it in the group chats, because one thing I don't think a lot of people realize is like the information dissemination we were getting in Ukraine was very, very slow. Secondly, the information wasn't accurate to us because as a demographic of minorities, we weren't being recognized as, people in Ukraine. The information was just for Ukrainians. So I was really adamant to find information that was specific to African students in Ukraine. So once Poland had released the information that, everybody's welcome to come to Poland, no matter your passport is. I was sharing that information, looking for embassy numbers and trying to assist fellow students whilst also fundraising on the road from Dnipro to Lviv. Once I finally reached Lviv with my group, we met some other girls who had also left Dnipro, and they had told us that on their way to Lviv, they'd been harassed racially. They weren't allowed to board the trains, and they were like physically pushed off the trains. And it was just so upsetting. That's the first instance I'd had that, you know, people had actually experienced racism trying to leave a war. Because in my mind, I would assume that in a time of war, people wouldn't be trying to, they would be thinking we're all one and we're all in this situation together. It wouldn't be segregation. But as history has shown us time and time again, whenever there's times of turmoil, Black people are always last. So when they were sharing their experiences with me, I was just like terrified. And then in the Telegram group chats, people who had now reached the Polish border were telling us that they'd either been returned from the Polish border or they had experienced violence from local Ukrainian people or violence amongst the queues. So from that, we were just like, okay, you know what? I don't think Poland is a good idea. Let's aim to go to Romania.
Unfortunately, I have to interrupt you because we are out of time, but I wanted to make sure that people find your website. It's called blackwomenforblacklives.org. This is the website. You guys should go on there and read more of Corinne Skye's story. I wish we had more time, and we will invite you back on. Corinne Skye, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and we're so glad you're safe. That is tonight's Readout. Cheers. All In with Chris Hayes starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Houston, Texas is one of the rare, nice, big cities left in this country. A little hot in the summer, but great people, very pretty neighborhoods, and a lot going on. Thanks to the energy sector, biotech, and aerospace, Houston has an enormous and still robust economy. It is hardly some dying mill town in the Northeast or the upper Midwest. Your kids might want to move to Houston someday, maybe after college.
It's some video that we saw earlier today and feel that you should see as well. We're showing it not to shock or tug at heartstrings, only so that you can see unsanitized, un-euphemized what this war, more than any European conflict since the Second World War, is about. Namely that invaders, unable to achieve their objectives, have turned instead to the destruction of cities, mass murder, which in human terms is really the murder of one person multiplied by the dozens, the hundreds, and now the thousands. One child buried in rubble, one missing father, one family killed while trying to flee, and today a fallen mother and a weeping son. That is what happened today in Kyiv to that man and to his mother. And it happened in other cities across Ukraine as well, to women and children, grandparents, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. The United Nations is out with a new estimate of civilian casualties, 726 killed. That, of course, is probably extremely low. As always, the UN official giving that estimate says the actual number is likely much higher. She also said that hundreds of residential buildings across the country have now been damaged or destroyed. Also schools, she said, such as this kindergarten in Kharkiv. In total, the UN estimates that at least 52 children have died since the war began, but again, that number is also almost certainly sickeningly low. As for hospitals and other healthcare facilities, a new assessment by the World Health Organization shows that upwards of 43 have been hit. 43. And as many as 35,000 psychiatric patients are facing severe shortages of medicines, food, heating, everything needed for basic survival, according to the World Health Organization. There is so much of it we simply cannot see, do not have access to or will only learn about long and long after this terrible fact. For now, one video of one grieving son, we think, carries more of the burden of speaking for the larger tragedy than it really should. Another casualty of a war. We can only hope tonight that a son can find at least a little solace now and in the days ahead. For more on what those days might hold, CNN's Sam Kiley reports for us from Kyiv. CNN's Caitlin Collins is at the White House, which has some tough diplomacy coming up, and CNN's Ed Lavandera is in eastern Poland, where close to 2 million refugees have now been able to arrive safely.
Still tonight, more and more Ukrainians are trying to escape to neighboring countries. Poland has received more refugees than any other nation. They've also taken in some new NATO troops, and those living close to the border are finding comfort in NATO's show of force, but they also worry that their country could be Putin's next target. Correspondent Robert Sherman is live in one of those border cities tonight. Robert, you are talking to people there on the ground about where things stand in the conflict. What are they telling you?
Well, there's a lot of tension in the air here, Marnie. As you said, concerns that once things wrap up in Ukraine, that potentially they could be next when it comes to being on the radar of Russian invasion. But people here are a bit more comforted by the fact that there are NATO troops so close by.
Whether it's on the ground or in Polish airspace, it's clear the U.S. military's presence is felt on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Pressure of the Russian military, progressively moving west through Ukraine, is felt as well. Polish citizens Paul and Claudia can't help but feel nervous, believing it's possible that once Russia's done in Ukraine, their country is next.
Yes, such thoughts come to us. We are afraid that Poland will be next, but we hope that the war will end and there will be peace.
As the war intensifies, U.S. forces have been building up in response. This base near the border hosts the 82nd Airborne, which arrived from Fort Bragg, North Carolina last month. In total, the U.S. has about 100,000 service members in Europe. But the Ukrainian border is where NATO is drawing its line, despite the pleas of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy.
Is this a lot to ask for, to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people? Is this too much to ask? Humanitarian no-fly zone.
So far, it has been, despite the fact bombings and air raids are part of the new normal for Ukrainians, who are begging for a no-fly zone as well.
Ukraine needs more help. They need to close the sky.
I want them to take action, especially President Biden, because it's all talk and no walk.
Even so, NATO affirms a no-fly zone is off the table, meaning NATO forces will keep to NATO territory and no more. Despite their worries, Paul and Claudia are supportive of NATO forces and what they're doing. All they want is for their one-year-old daughter, Lana, to grow up in a safer world.
We are worried about living in such a country. We just want to live in peace.
And the Poles that we're speaking with here say that if NATO must act and if NATO must take direct action, they do not want it to be weak. They want it to be decisive. Marnie?
Robert, what are you hearing about the supply lines, not only for humanitarian aid for the refugees there, but also the supply line of military aid going into Ukraine?
Well, I mean, again, it depends where you are in Ukraine. Of course, some of the supply lines have been compromised in the eastern portions of the country, especially when you get down to Mariupol. What we have seen is that when you have crossings such as this one, this is where supplies are still entering Ukraine, and they're getting to places out in western Ukraine, some of the places that we've been to, such as Lviv and some of those other cities. But it is that distinction between eastern Ukraine and the west.
The tale of two cities or two parts of one country. All right, Robert, thank you. Awaiting refugees in Poland is a group of volunteers and helpers providing warm meals, clothing, medicine, and in a lot of cases, a hug or just a shoulder to cry on. Alina DeBeck is one of those helpers. She is a volunteer, and she has been posting regular updates of the humanitarian side of this war on social media. And Alina is joining me live tonight from Poland. Thank you so much for your time and for everything that you're doing. Let's first talk about how you're helping those at the border.
Yes, so the help is broad because we help the people arriving at the train station and at the border. So we help them with hot food, hot drinks. We provide strollers for the little ones, nappies, and everything that mothers might need for the children. Yes, we've got a lot of medicine as well that we sort out and we distribute where